But what is the role of the controller in reference to the press in terms of the order of events? So you find something that you question or that you think, not to the point that you know is illegal, but you're at that point where you're questioning. When does the controller reach that point when the controller contacts the press?
Well, that's something I haven't completely thought through, but one thing I don't know if I mentioned it or not, but I could envision the controller having a regular spot on the city council agenda, either before or after the mayor, or wherever the council thought it was fit. And that would be the time for making public statements and reporting on any progress that had been made without compromising anybody. I think that would be a good thing, and the press could pick up on that. And if I had nothing to say that particular meeting, I would take a pass, like the mayor does sometimes. As for questions from the press, well, it would depend on the question. I can see answering some questions and not others.
Okay, you answered both those parts of that, and then we know a significant part of your life is what you might call civic life. We know you mostly as a regular attendee at City Council, sometimes prescriptive, sometimes critical, but almost always pleasant. But putting those adjectives aside, because I want to come back to them later on, but putting those adjectives aside, someone's critical, prescriptive, I actually have barely complimentary in there, but still, disregard all of that, and instead, can you tell me that if your time in here in city chambers, when we mostly see you, speaking during public comment, is this the most significant, middle significant, most satisfying outlet of your civic life? I mean, is this the essence of yourself, of Bill Shire in civic life, or what else defines you as an engaged citizen in Bethlehem, if anything?
Well, it is perhaps no, without a doubt, it's the primary activity, but I mean, there are others as well. Well, I mentioned those, the South Bethlehem Historical Society, which is quite recent, but that's become important. I'm an associate member, as I mentioned, of the Bethlehem Historic District Association because I was in DC on the equivalent of the HARP for our historic district, which was one of more than 24 in the city. I'm sometimes a docent at the Sun Inn Preservation Association. There's a theme here. And the Torch Club is something else, but that's also meaningful in my life. And I like to read. And that's about it. But the City Council has been important, yes.
Yeah, I have one last question. Well, I'm going to say straight out that this is a personal question, and no one really should be compelled to answer.
Okay, you can ask anything you want.
Okay, well, you say that, but I'm giving you an out here because this is really goes above and beyond what anyone would normally be asked in public. But I think I want to hear it. I want to hear what you have to say on this.
Okay.
The 2011 council election, it did have high civic engagement. You can say that. That's the good part. The election, however, wasn't all good. A lot of damage was done to individuals in the name of politics and campaigning. A lot of damage. There's a lot of very angry people on both sides of the winners and the ones who didn't win. We know, it's public knowledge, you supported 3 candidates who didn't win, and you supported one who won, and you did not support 2 candidates who won, who are seated on council. Of course, we all fully support your right to support whomever you choose. That's not the issue. We know you showed your support by putting up yard signs on your yard. You can't be more open than that. But did you also aggressively campaign against any seated council members? Did you aggressively campaign, like, for example, I don't know if you know that it's against the law to sort of a cost or go up to people and say, you shouldn't vote for certain people. It's okay to advocate for voters, but you're not supposed to advocate against. Did you subvert the election process by engaging in that behavior in the last election?
That's quite a question.
You don't have to answer it.
No, I will answer it. I'm glad to have the opportunity to answer it, actually. Yeah, I had 4 yard signs out front for the 3 Republicans and for Bob Donges. It's been a policy of mine, and speaking of the word policy, ever since I came back to my hometown 9 years ago, anyone who asked me to put a yard sign out front, put a yard sign out front. I had 4 yard signs, as I said, for City Council. There was at least 4 other yard signs for other offices. So my front yard does look a little congested at election time. After the election is over, they all disappear. But I have never said no to anyone who asked to put a yard sign in my front yard. As for the doing, I'm searching for a word, but doing such things in the election, at the election. I went to the election, I voted, I left. The only person I spoke to was Mr. Fenstermacher, who is the person who decides whether or not you're a registered voter. But I'm glad you asked that question. It enables me to say absolutely not.
And I apologize for asking you.
No, that's okay. No, I'm glad you asked it.
I'll tie that in with my bigger comments without putting anyone else on any kind of a spot. I only did that to you, and I'm sorry that I had to do that, but I won't be doing that to anyone else. And thank you for manning up and answering. I appreciate that. It's important. Those are all my questions for Bill Shire. I understand that you wanted now to.
I'd definitely do it that way if anyone would like to ask questions of candidate. Mr. Shire, yes. Mr. Reynolds, Councilman Reynolds.
Just a couple of comments / questions for you, Mr. Shire. I'd read through your, thank you, by the way, for the responses to the questions. I know that as well as the letter that you gave us, there was lots of good information in there. I know lots of people in council certainly enjoyed the responses, and I think that you certainly, as all of us have said, you're certainly well qualified. There was one thing in there that you had said, and I'm not sure if you were aware or not, that we actually had gotten a memo today from Mr. Allman, the Deputy Controller, because as you saw tonight, there was a communication today on the agenda having to do with a RCAP grant for Lehigh Valley Hospital. I'm not sure if you saw that on the agenda or not.
I noticed it. Okay.
One of the things you had mentioned in there, and it's certainly come up before, and I think all of us at certain times have spoken highly of the idea of having some type of pilot programs, payment in lieu of taxes, having to do with nonprofits, and it was one of the things you included in here. And one of the things that Mr. Allman had said at the bottom of his memo to council was that City Council does not normally see the sub-agreements on these contracts, but a clause could be added that a pilot will be negotiated, included in the deal that we have with the RCAP. And like I said, I know you have spoken highly of pilots in the past, and I know that people on council have spoken highly of pilots in the past as well. And if you could just kind of comment on that idea from Mr. Allman, I would appreciate it.
Well, actually, I'm not sure as the controller I should comment, because that would be a policy question. But I'm not the controller yet, so I can comment. Definitely. I feel the nonprofits need to pay more of their share to the expenses of the city. And I commend Mr. Raschuti for raising that during the election. And by the way, thank you for answering my questions during the election, which the Express Times was kind enough to post.
You sent them to me. I was going to answer them. You say that, and it kind of leads to my next question. And you, in your response there, when you had said, since you're not the controller, you can answer that, and you want that to be included in there. And I think one thing, while we all have spoken once again highly of the idea of the pilot process, I think one thing, and like we know, you are very, very involved and you have strong opinions about many of these things. And you yourself had said earlier today that there shouldn't be policy views in the controller's office. And in Mr. Allman's memo, while I greatly respect him and I have a great deal of respect for the idea, this is, and he is not here tonight, and I know just by casual conversation with other members of council, when they read that, they were a little bit taken aback that Mr. Allman would suggest such a strong policy position in a memo from the, I don't know if you want to call him the deputy controller or not, and that as far as this idea of separating the policy views from the controller's office, this is clearly a policy view. And one thing, and I'm not sure what Councilwoman Dolan, I believe she was referring before to the fact that in the past, and this was when I was on council as well as some other people, and when the RCAP grants had come for both the steel stacks and for Ben Franklin Technology Partners, you had kind of opined, and used your opinion, which is certainly fine, that City Council either shouldn't support them or should be concerned about some of those things in there, which once again is kind of a policy view. And I think when I take a look at that, while once again I think that there certainly is a lot of positive things that come from pilot programs, we hear on one side that it's a policy that the controller's office is policy neutral. But for Mr. Allman, as well as when you had said you agreed with this idea, it's something, and I think when we look at Lehigh Valley Hospital, the largest employer in the Lehigh Valley next to St. Luke's, when we look at the amount of jobs that are being created over there, the fact that we might want to hold up a grant like that because of maybe we disagree with a policy, or that we almost want to figuratively hold a gun to their head that if you don't agree to this pilot program, we won't pass the grant. I find that to be troubling. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Oh, sure. I haven't thought about that before this instant, but it strikes me that when you talk about sources of revenue, this goes beyond the controller's job. And the controller may have views, personal views, but they're kept in hibernation for the next 2 years. That's, if I become controller, that's obviously something that Mr. Allman and I will have to talk about. There's something else I was going to say, but I forget it.
Okay, I think when we take, you also had said before, to a question that Councilman Dolan had about the decision being between the grantee and the grantor as far as the granting of I think the state money that Councilman Dolan had stated before. You had said that that's really a decision between the grantor and the grantee.
Yeah, I'm not sure what she was referring to, but we can talk about that afterwards.
I think that well, it's certainly something I'd like to ask you about now. As far as but once again, if that's your opinion, that's between the grantor and the grantee. Like I said, we have heard before, and as far as ArtsQuest and Ben Franklin, who, as we know, has also been a huge job creator in the city of Bethlehem, you have expressed personal reservations about those things. And as you know, these RCAPs come across the controller's desk. Yeah. So I think that part of the reason why we're asking these questions about your policy views is even the idea that we might turn down. I believe, and I'm not sure the exact number, but I think Steel Stacks and ArtsQuest/PBS got almost $13 million. And they were able to leverage that with another $39 million. Ben Franklin got, I wrote it down before, Ben Franklin got almost $6 million, and they were able to leverage that with another $10 million. So the idea that these policy views, and Mr. Shire, like I said, I understand what you're saying, and I mean, I think you've answered these questions, you've answered all of the questions we have asked. But I think that the concern that at least I have is that not only with some of your past kind of questions, you did advocate for us, because I know your concern had been, once again, everyone has their concerns, you thought that the cafe/restaurant at Steel Stacks was going to compete with private cafes and restaurants. That was something you had said that's in the council minutes. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's a big concern for me that these policy views, while I know you're telling me that you're putting them aside, that you're dropping them once you get the office, I've been on this world for 30 years, and I think most people have been here longer than I have. And it's tough to separate sometimes people's personal opinions from what they have to carry out. And as far as these RCAP contracts, it would lead someone like me to believe that if you've been the controller at the time, and you had shared your opinion with us about us not accepting the RCAP grant for Arts Quest or being concerned about the Steel Stacks project, that could have potentially left the city of Bethlehem without one of the best things that happened to the city in a long time. And I think that I have a concern about that, but I certainly will let you answer.
Okay. I think a couple of things I have said have perhaps been misconstrued. For example, on Ben Franklin, my concern was land use planning, not the financial aspects of it. Land use planning. I was concerned about South Mountain, and in particular the top of South Mountain. And I did oppose the variance for those reasons. I thought they could equally well do their expansion down at the site they have further down the hill, down towards the stadium. My concerns there were purely land use planning. I can't recall opposing a state grant going to somebody, and I don't see why I would. But on the subject of the cafe at Steel Stacks, for example, that's the question again of the mercantile tax. Is the city getting all that it should, or if you will, the pilot? I think that's a concern of the controller, not only the expenditure side, but the revenue side. It's not the job of the controller to interfere in policy decisions. For example, new sources of revenue. That is a policy matter, and that's for the council and the administration to decide. So I frankly don't understand the questions about these grants, because I don't recall ever opposing any grant from financial grounds. As I said, Ben Franklin was a land use issue, and the cafe business that I raised one night when Jeff Parks was here was from the mercantile tax issue.
Okay, and as far as opposing the variance is concerned, as I said before, Ben Franklin got almost $6 million. I mean, that was a project that came before that came before the city. And as we know, I will not go into the numbers, the revenue numbers that Ben Franklin has produced since it went to an existence in the state of Pennsylvania. When you had said you haven't opposed the particular state grants, but it was the days when, and it's in the council minutes that came up, had to do with the acceptance of the money as far as these things are connected. So I guess one of the things that I find potentially troubling here is the fact that you essentially have stated that you have to balance different ideas in your mind as far as maximizing things like mercantile tax, but at the same time we're looking at something like Steel Stacks, which wasn't coming along with, as the cafe. That's a potential I don't want to say conflict of interest for you, but it's a conflict as far as carrying out the job of the controller versus these personal beliefs. And like I said, I understand when you tell me that if you are picked as a controller, you can enter the office and put all this stuff behind. I also know, though, and this is, you were to be credited for this, you've come to council meetings. I've been coming for, I believe, 7 years. I started coming at the end of 2005, and I've been coming for almost 7 years. And you've got very strong opinions about this. And to say that you will separate the policy views in the controller's office is hard for me to take, especially when earlier today I just asked you about Mr. Ullman's memo, and that was something that you had said that you agreed with.
No, as a citizen, yes, but not as controller. As I said, Mr. Ullman and I would have to talk about that. And as for the cafe, I mean, the controller's job is to follow the law. The law includes a mercantile tax. It's the job of the controller, as I see it, to see that the necessary mercantile tax is being collected. That's all. That's as far as it goes. And I say again on Benjamin Franklin, I think Benjamin Franklin is a very worthy institution, and I was glad to see them expanding and doing more of what they do. I just was hoping they wouldn't have to go to the top of the mountain.
just a couple more questions, then I'll wrap it up here. I think then just kind of before I move on to a different topic, I guess that as we know, the controller has to sign off on a lot of these contracts. And it's, in my opinion, and once again, we can have a disagreement on this, and I certainly respect your opinion, is that I see a difference between I see a difference between what your personal views are and some of your statements, both in the questions and some of the statements tonight, as far as how you would carry out the controller's duties. But like I said, we can certainly disagree. We can agree to disagree there. I think my concern would be is that some of these personal policy decisions would potentially could cost us a little bit. I know this RCAP, as we all know, when the new governor came in and with some of the fiscal problems facing the state, RCAP funding is at a premium. And I think that some of these, as you said, it's not the controller's job to make policy, but at the same time, over the last several years, and even tonight, I think I've heard something to that would contradict that. Before you had mentioned a comment about if somebody came to you and was a cent over, and I know you had suggested changing the process as far as, but before, we know that something like that would likely take, you know, a decent amount of time as far as council committee meetings, feedback from the controller, feedback from the administration, feedback from the public. So then I guess what I'm asking is if you were the controller and that came up next week and something was 1 cent over, would you not sign it because it was 1 cent over?
No. Thank you for the lead-in. The present process, as I understand it, is that small deviations are overlooked. And this is a very pragmatic thing to do, and it's a short-run solution. It's not the best solution, though, in my opinion. In the medium term, once you get into the process of saying, okay, a little bit is okay, then the question becomes, how much is okay? And that's where you can get disagreements among the council, the administration, and the controller. And this, I believe, has led to some of the acrimony that has occurred from time to time. And I don't think this is a good thing. And in the longer term, it's even a poorer solution, because if the administration says, okay, we need an extra 50% for a small account, and the controller says, okay, that's a short-term solution. And for the interim, I would continue that policy, but it puts you in the position of the administration and the controller modifying the ordinance, leaving the city council out of it. And that, to me, is not the best solution. And I believe that we all, and especially the administration and the council, immediately consider legislation retroactive to January 1st that would allow automatic transfers up to a cumulative and legislated percentage that would depend on the nature of the expenditure and/or fund and on the size of the account. As an example of considering the size of the account, the leeway on the entire general fund would be less in percentage terms than the leeway on a department total because of the greater dollars in the entire general fund. There could be still higher percentages allowed for subtotals and so on. The allowed percentages would be in the amended budget and would be approved by council in consultation with the administration. I think that this would give the administration more flexibility and would give the controller more flexibility and would give the council more flexibility, and everybody would be within the law.
Thank you. I guess then my follow-up question to that is you had referenced the small deviation before, and I think that obviously there's a clear line that we all draw between being financially accountable and coming to finance committee. And up until that happens, I know how hard it has been for us to schedule meetings and how hard it'll be for a look through this. And this would be a big change that you're proposing that we would certainly have to look at very seriously. But up until that point, I mean, what is the what's the limit then that you would believe in as far as a small deviation would be concerned before it becomes something? Because at the last meeting you had said, I think, and I'm not sure if it was Councilman Dolan or someone else that asked the question about the transfer that we had discussed at the beginning of January. That was something that you had said that you would not have signed, correct?
That's right, because that was a very large deviation. And but in the case, and I think there was something that could have been done that wasn't done, and that was, well, a couple of things that might have been possible. And again, here we could need a revision to the ordinance. For example, my recommendation, and this is where I think the controller has a voice, because it has to do with managing the finances of the city. There needs to be some attention paid to the emergency powers within the council. I know there's something in Robert's rules about emergency meetings, and I haven't researched it recently, but I think there'd be something there that could be adapted into the council rules. Might even be possible to have, and I'm just throwing some ideas out here for dealing with situations like this, might be possible to give the president power to authorize in exceptional circumstances, or maybe the president and the chairman of the finance committee in exceptional circumstances. After polling, Mr. Spadoni is shaking his head, but after polling, not meeting, but just getting the sense of the council. But I think the better solution would be the emergency meeting. And it should be possible within a couple of days to arrange something like that. And in which case, in this recent case of the payroll coming out of the escrow, the checks might have been delayed a couple of days, and as I said, that would have been, the employees wouldn't have liked it, and it would have been unfair to the employees. But it was doable, and I think it would have been a better solution.
So there's, just so I'm clear here, so then as far as the definition of what you think a small deviation is currently under the ordinance, it's not something that there's, you don't have a particular answer for what
No,
a small
and I
deviation
think
would
it
be?
should vary, as I said, by size of the account. The smaller the account, the greater the percentage that could be allowed. If you have an account, say, that's $100, like the previous example,
Yeah.
you might allow 100% deviation.
Yeah. So currently, in the role of the controller, before this new legislation was passed, that's the way you would take a look at it?
No, and I would continue the present practice but I would like to see this legislation, this ordinance revised. I think that would be better for all concerned.
But as far as the present practice is concerned, just explain again what you believe the present practice is as far as the controller's office.
Well, I've heard that in at one time there was a 5% rule. I don't know if that still exists or what it is. I mean, that would be a starting point. It would have to be on a case-by-case basis as to whether or not this was a significant deviation from what the budget the council passed. But as I said, it would be better to have the flexibility built into the budget. Would be far more preferable.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. Thank you. Any other questions, follow-up questions for Mr. Shire? Clear on the side. There. Okay, thank you, Mr. Shire.
Mm-hmm.
Would anyone in council like to question any other of the candidates, of the nominees? Councilwoman Dolan?
Mr. George Yassa.
Mr. Yassa.
Mr. Yassa. Oh, I will. I'm going to start. Some folks asked me, or they stated it was unfair that I had asked kind of a tough question of two of the candidates, and then I hadn't gone ahead and asked it of other candidates. So
Sure.
I'll ask you the same question that you might recall from last week. As council members, we've passed laws, and we have seen them disregarded by the administration. This has been frustrating for us at times, especially when we learn how little we can actually do, save, taking these measures that are not acceptable. Like, we can take our mayor to court, we can sue our own city, things that are not not solving the problem as we see it. But members of the public, and here I'm not speaking about you, but in particular regular attendees, they were very critical of us during that time. We were told that we were, we would do nothings, we were condoning the administration. And I'm wondering, if you were a controller, what action would you take? The example I'll give is one that's occurred here on a couple of occasions, that the administration needs to make ends meet. They need to make payroll. And say it's the end of a fiscal year, and they're counting on certain taxes being paid, and it's January, and those taxes haven't been paid, and there's no money authorized, no money left over to pay for payroll. So we've gone ahead and said you can't do it without getting our permission, and in some cases they've gone ahead and they've broken those pre-authorization rules, and then either we found out later or they would inform us right after having done it. If you were aware that something like that was going on, what action would you take? What would you do that would have been different than what council did?
Well, certainly full disclosure is always the best policy. In a situation where, the act has already occurred and the money was already moved, and should council have been consulted and approved it previously to it happening, absolutely. Once it's already been done, as I think some of the other gentlemen stated, you're put in a very precarious situation. Because again, you're not looking to go start arresting people out of the administration or suing your own city or anything like that. I think the best way to address that is kind of learn from it. I think that had it been thought about more, maybe anticipated more, it's the beginning of a new year. There's going to be taxes owed to us, or income taxes owed to us that haven't been collected yet. So maybe if the administration had been approached by the controller previously in anticipation of that, hey, is the money there? Are we going to need to move funds around? Then the controller may have been able to relay that to council so that the situation didn't occur the way it did, and the controller as well as council is now put in a precarious situation. Is, well, it already happened. How do we approach this now? I think really, other than anticipating it and trying to, again, fully disclose anything you do know, if you don't know that it happened, you certainly can't disclose it.
Good answer. Thank you. I have one other question. I'm wondering how you're feeling about all of this. You and I have spoken 2 or 3 times on the phone.
Sure.
Before you even submitted, I think, your resume and all that, really early in the game, midway, and then fairly recently. And I'm wondering how confident you're feeling right now, after everything you've learned and you've heard this past week, that you are the best person for the job. And if you could answer it, how you would characterize your confidence, why do you feel the way that you do?
Sure. I think this has been a very interesting process for me. As I stated before, I've had no direct involvement in politics at any level. It's been kind of a political baptism by fire for me, these last 2 meetings, and it's been very interesting. Being a part of the process. The reason I'm confident is I'm confident in my knowledge, I'm confident in my integrity, I'm confident in my ability to remain independent. I know that, and I know that it seems to be one of the biggest issues is can someone be independent? And things have been said about my social ties and about this and that, and I don't apologize for any social ties I have. I've lived in this city for, other than the 4 years that I went away to college, I lived here since I was 6 years old. My father's side has a very big family, many of whom still live here. I'm socially active in the city, through business, through athletics, through coaching, through different charities that I'm involved in. And I do know that a lot of people know who I am, and I have a good reputation among those people. I'd like to think so, at least. And that's not something I apologize for. That's something that I'm proud of, and that, you know, I feel makes me a good selection for this position. That I am somebody that, as long as I'm fulfilling the role to the best of my abilities, that would be a very electable candidate to provide some stability and some continuity to the Controller's office. If that answers your question.
It does, thank you.
Okay.
I don't have some questions.
Okay, thank you, Councilwoman Dolan. Questions, Councilman Reynolds?
I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Mr. Shire. How can we be sure that you're not taking policy views or your own personal views into the Controller's office? Because it's certainly a concern of mine. As we said, it's been eloquently stated before that the Controller's office is not one of policy setting. It's more following the third-class city code as far as what the expectations are of the Controller. So if you could just kind of explain about how you can set aside your individual policy views, your individual views about a lot of these issues as far as carrying out the role of the Controller.
Sure. You know, on the surface, I'm sure it's much easier to, you know, I don't want to say to pick on Mr. Shire, but, you know, as someone who's as involved as he is and comes to these meetings, you know, of course he's going to have views, and, you know, of course, you know, myself is not a regular attendee, although I follow, you know, city issues through other venues, you know, as not a regular attendee, you know, it's certainly easier to say that one person would be more partial than the other. I don't feel that that's the correct way to do it. You know, I feel the only way that you can truly know that I'm going to be impartial is to take my word for it, and that there's no reason for you not to believe that. And I've never done anything in the past to compromise my integrity. You know, and again, I think the same can be said for Mr. Shire. You know, you can only take him at his word. And, you know, I don't know him personally. If he's a man of integrity, then take him at his word.
Thank you. That was it for my questions, Mr. Evans.
Okay, thank you, Councilman Reynolds. Any more questions for Mr. Yasso? Okay, thank you. Mr. Yasso? Thank you. With questions completed, are there any comments? I'll ask it of council. They'd like to make any comments about their candidate or any other overviews before we move into a roll call and run an election. Councilman Dolan.
I want to start by explaining. I want to start by just coming right out and saying why I won't be able to vote for Dave D.G. Sintel. I don't think there's any doubt whatsoever that in terms of experience, what he's currently doing, plus time involved in council, that he hits on all of those areas of experience, expertise. There's no doubt in my mind that, as Councilman Donchez said, he could hit the ground running. But I don't think I'm the only one who feels this way. We sometimes are put into the position as council people to sit in for the electorate. Someone resigns, who's an elected official, and we have to fill that position as if we represent the electorate, you know, directly. And it's not a position that's comfortable. It's been a very, very difficult week. But if we put Dave into that position, then we have to kind of take two hits to the electoral process. And I think that should only be done if you have no other choice. If I really believe that there wasn't anyone else And it took me a while to decide whether I really thought there was anyone else who could fit that role. But if I hadn't, then I might have considered doing that. But it's not something that we should do unless we absolutely have no other alternative. So I want to go back to the picture, the big picture, and the reason why I asked Mr. Shire about his political support in 2011. But to do so, I have to take you back a little bit to a comment that Stephen Talix made. Stephen Talix, I see you like this. I'm talking about you now. Made a number of years ago, and he spoke of us up here as the elected council, and of the 7 or so regular attendees as, if I have this right, the shadow council. I believe that's what he called us. And so shadow council, elected council. Well, you know, we know what you think of us because you tell us. We are pretty much constantly reminded, not just by the shadow council, but by the media and by people in our community, that all politicians are alike, and that we're really not capable of thinking for ourselves but we can think in factions. We can kind of team up and think, you know, in small group think. And the other option is we could be beholden to a leader. So that's the elected council as defined by many Americans right now. Elected officials as defined by many Americans. And I thought it might be interesting to share with you, because it is very germane to what's going on here tonight, I believe, a little insight into what I think we think of you and how that's impacting tonight's deliberation. I think it's kind of similar. I think that it's common for elected officials, at least in Bethlehem, to paint you guys with a big broad brush, to see you as all alike. Maybe you're in factions, or maybe you're beholden to a leader. Some of us might even imagine you at Perkins at night after meetings, colluding, bad-mouthing us, all agreeing that any of you would do a better job than any of us could do. And all of this went along pretty much without change. We even endured being graded by some members of the shadow council, and I would say less like a teacher and more like a side of beef by the